Nobody builds something from nothing without paying a price they did not expect. Darnell Cruz paid his in calluses, concrete dust, and years of sleeping 4 hours a night. He started Cruz and Stone construction with a pickup truck, a borrowed drill set, and a wife who believed in him before he believed in himself. That part matters. That part is the whole story. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode may touch a story that is still unfolding. Vanessa Cruz had not walked in 11 years. A late-night collision on Route 9 took that from her quietly, permanently, without apology. The doctors gave her a chair. She gave it a purpose. While Darnell worked job sites in the Georgia heat, Vanessa ran everything else. Loan applications, vendor contracts, payroll spreadsheets at 2 in the morning, city permit filings that required 3 revisions before approval. She did it all from a corner desk in their 2-bedroom house, with a cold cup of coffee beside her and a phone pressed to her ear. She was not the face of the company, she was its spine. People who visited their home always noticed the same thing, not the wheelchair, but the walls. Printed invoices pinned in neat rows, binders stacked by date, a whiteboard covered in timelines and contractor names written in her careful handwriting. Darnell's name was on the business license. Vanessa's fingerprints were on everything else. They did not have glamour, they had discipline. They did not have investors. They had each other, and in the early years, that was enough to outwork everyone around them. Darnell was not a complicated man. He was loyal to what he could see, touch, and measure. He measured success in square footage, completed contracts, and the number of men on his payroll. By year 7, he had 42 employees and a reputation in the Tri-County area as the contractor who delivered on time without cutting corners. That reputation was built on Vanessa's documentation, her follow-up calls, and her refusal to let a single detail fall through. She never asked for credit. That was not why she did it. She did it because she loved him, and because building something together was the closest thing to running that she had left. On a Tuesday evening in March, Darnell came home earlier than usual. He set his work boots by the door, a habit she had trained into him, and stood at the kitchen entrance watching her. She was on the phone, reading from a binder, making notes in the margin with a red pen. She did not notice him right away. When she did, she smiled. He smiled back. Neither of them knew. It was one of the last quiet moments they would share before everything changed. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. City of Hargrove, Office of Infrastructure Development. Darnell read it once standing at the mailbox. Then he sat on the porch steps and read it again. 77 pages. Cruz and Stone Construction had been selected as the primary contractor for the Hargrove Transit Corridor expansion. Project value, $67 million. 18 months of work. A citywide initiative that would put his name on bridges, tunnels, and elevated rail foundations from downtown to the Eastern District. He did not shout. He did not call anyone. He walked inside, placed the letter on Vanessa's desk, and waited. She read it slowly. Her eyes moved line by line. When she reached the project value, she stopped, set the letter down, picked it up again. Then she looked at him, and her eyes were full not of tears exactly, but of something older and quieter. Recognition. All those late nights and rejected bids and revised applications had been leading somewhere. They had arrived. "We did it," she said. He nodded. "We did." But something shifted in Darnell that afternoon, something small and almost invisible, the way a crack forms in concrete long before the structure shows any sign of failing. He stood in their modest living room and looked around it with new eyes. Not gratitude, measurement. The calls began within 48 hours. City officials, media contacts, Chamber of Commerce representatives, a regional business magazine requesting an interview and a photo. Darnell Cruz was suddenly a name that people wanted attached to their own. He handled the attention the way a man handles sunlight after years underground, gratefully at first, then hungrily. Vanessa watched it all from her corner desk. She answered questions when asked. She prepared the compliance documentation the city required. She organized the subcontractor agreements and flagged 3 clauses in the primary contract that needed legal review before signing. She did what she always did. She held it together. But the world that was arriving at their door was not interested in Vanessa Cruz. It was interested in Darnell, his jawline in the magazine photo, his handshake at the city hall reception, his name on the banner at the contractors' summit held at the Hargrove Grand Hotel. She was not in the photo. She had not been invited to the summit. Darnell had not said anything about it. He had simply not mentioned it. That omission was the first sign, not the last. The new circle formed fast, the way opportunistic things always do, around warmth, around money, around the scent of arrival. Marcus Hale came first, a commercial real estate broker with a silver watch and the kind of smile that cost money to maintain. He and Darnell met at the summit, and by the following week, Marcus was calling him daily, suggesting dinners, connections, introductions to men who moved at a different level. Then came the others, investors, junior city officials, a sports agent who had nothing to offer but access to rooms that felt important. They gathered around Darnell the way birds gather around fresh ground, efficient, purposeful, temporary. They met at restaurants Darnell had never eaten in before, places with lighting designed to make everyone look like they belonged. The conversations were fluent and fast: deals, names, opportunities, leverage. Darnell learned the language quickly. He had always been a fast learner. Vanessa was mentioned once. At dinner, Marcus asked casually whether Darnell had a situation at home. Darnell said yes, he was married. Marcus nodded slowly, the way men nod when they are deciding how much to say. She ever come to these things? She has mobility limitations, Darnell said. A pause at the table. Someone pivoted to another topic, but not before a look passed between Marcus and the man beside him, brief, almost invisible, almost. It happened again at a rooftop event 3 weeks later. A woman named Priya, who managed partnerships for a development firm, leaned over and asked Darnell why his wife was never around. He gave the same answer: mobility limitations. Priya tilted her head. "It must be difficult," she said, in the tone people use when they mean something entirely different. Darnell said nothing. That was the problem. He said nothing. He did not correct the implication, did not straighten the conversation. He let it sit there, and by letting it sit, he agreed to it. That is how shame works in quiet men, not in what they say, but in what they choose not to defend. The mockery never became loud. It did not have to. A smirk at the mention of Vanessa's name was enough. A redirect when Darnell brought up her contribution to the company. A silence that said more than laughter would have. Darnell began to notice how he talked about her. He stopped using her name in certain rooms. Stopped mentioning the desk in the corner, the binders, the 2 in the morning phone calls that held his company together through its hardest years. He edited her out of the story he was telling about himself. And the new circle accepted that version gladly, because it made their own version of Darnell easier to use. Vanessa had always been observant. When you cannot move through a room the way others do, you learn to read it differently. You notice who walks past without greeting you. You notice the slight hesitation before someone chooses to sit beside you. You notice when a man who used to tell you everything begins arriving home with stories that feel already edited. She noticed. She did not say anything immediately. That was not weakness. That was wisdom. Loyal people do not rush to confront what they already know. They wait for the moment to clarify itself, because sometimes love deserves the chance to correct its own course. Darnell began coming home later. Not dramatically late, just enough to miss dinner, enough to slide into the house after she had already moved to the bedroom. He was not hiding, he was avoiding. There is a difference, and Vanessa understood it precisely. She continued her work. The transit corridor project required more documentation than anything they had handled before. Federal compliance forms, environmental review submissions, subcontractor insurance verification. She built organized folders for each category and left them on his desk with sticky notes marking the priority items. He thanked her briefly, did not sit down to review them with her the way he used to. There was a night, a Thursday, mid-April, when she heard him on the phone in the kitchen. She was not trying to listen, but the house was small and his voice carried when he was comfortable. He was describing his company, his vision, the team he had built. Every word was accurate, none of them included her. She turned off her desk lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, not crying, just sitting with the knowledge of what was coming the way you sit with a diagnosis you already suspected. She made a decision that night not to leave, not to confront, but to finish. Whatever was still unfinished in the project documentation, whatever compliance reports were still outstanding, she would complete them. Not for him, for the integrity of the work itself. because that was who she was and no man's drift could change that. She worked until 3 in the morning. Darnell slept soundly in the next room. The distance between them had become its own kind of architecture, invisible to anyone outside, load-bearing in ways neither of them had yet admitted. He chose a Sunday, a quiet afternoon with light coming through the kitchen window in that specific way that makes ordinary rooms look almost kind. He sat across from her at the table where they had eaten 10,000 meals, signed their first business loan, and once spent an entire night mapping out a bid strategy on yellow legal pads. He folded his hands. He looked at the table first, then at her. Vanessa, a pause. Things are different now. She did not respond. She let him continue. He talked about growth, about image, about the level he was moving toward and the expectations that came with it. He used the word perception twice. He said the phrase, "it's not personal," once, which is something people say precisely when it is deeply personal. He did not use the word disability. He said circumstances. He said where we both are right now. He arranged his cruelty in the most neutral language he could find, the way a man signs a document without reading what it costs. Vanessa listened to all of it, every word. When he finished, the room was very quiet. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they are memorizing for the last time. Not with anger, not with devastation, with a clarity that was more unsettling than either. "You've decided," she said. It was not a question. He nodded. She did not argue. She did not remind him of the loan applications or the permit filings or the years she answered calls at midnight so his company could survive until morning. She did not list what she was owed. Dignity does not make lists. She simply turned her chair and moved toward the hallway. He sat at the table and waited for something, for her to come back, for an argument to begin, for anything that would make this moment feel less final. Nothing came. The sound of her moving through the house was soft and methodical. Drawers opening, closet doors. The careful, quiet work of a woman who had already accepted what the man at the table had not yet fully understood he had done. He did not help her pack. He stayed at the table until the front door opened, and then gently, without drama, closed behind her. The house did not change. That was the strange part. Everything remained where it was. The furniture sat in its place. The kitchen held its usual smell of wood and dish soap. His boots were still by the door. The whiteboard was still on the wall in the corner. But her desk was empty. The binders were gone. The sticky notes. The red pen she kept clipped to the edge of the monitor. The small framed photograph of the two of them at the groundbreaking of their first commercial project. The one where she was laughing mid-sentence, not posing, just alive and present. Gone. Darnell stood in the corner of the room and looked at the empty desk for a long time. He did not call Marcus. He did not go to dinner. He stood there until the light changed, and the room became dimmer and eventually dark, and he had not moved to turn on a single lamp. There is a specific kind of quiet that arrives after a loyal person leaves. It is not peaceful quiet. It is the quiet of a building after the foundation has been removed, everything still standing for now, through nothing but habit and momentum. He poured a glass of water he did not drink. He sat on the couch and looked at his phone and scrolled without reading anything. He went to the bedroom and lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. He told himself it was the right decision. He told himself she would be fine, that she was capable, that she had people who cared for her. He told himself several things that night that he did not entirely believe, and each one sat heavier than the last. By morning, he was already moving. Meetings to attend, a project timeline to present, a world that was waiting for Darnell Cruz and had no interest in his Sunday evenings or the empty corner of a room he could not quite stop looking at. He put on his best suit. He drove to the city. He did not look back at the house when he pulled out of the driveway, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel, and they did not fully loosen for a very long time. The first sign came from the city's legal office, a formal request for compliance documentation related to the environmental impact phase of the transit corridor project. Standard procedure. The kind of request that in any normal week would have landed on Vanessa's desk and been answered within 48 hours. Darnell forwarded it to his new project coordinator, a man named Elliot, recommended by Marcus, articulate and confident in the way people are when they have not yet been tested. Elliot could not find the files. Darnell told him to look again. The files did not exist in any system Elliot had access to. The folder structure Vanessa used, her own architecture of categories, subcategories, version numbers, and cross-references, was stored in a backup system she had set up and managed herself. Without her login credentials, without her organizational logic, without her, the documentation was effectively inaccessible. A second request arrived from the city 5 days later. This one was not routine. It referenced a federal compliance clause tied to contractor certification. Missing or incomplete documentation could trigger a contract review. A contract review could trigger a hold. Darnell called his lawyer. His lawyer told him to get the documents. He called his new administrative team, 3 people who had been hired quickly, paid well, and were thoroughly unprepared for the complexity of what Vanessa had spent years building. They searched the shared drives. They searched old emails. They printed what they could find and spread it across a conference table like the pieces of a puzzle they had not been given a picture for. It was not enough. The city's project manager, a careful, deliberate woman named Director Osai, sent a formal notice. Crews and stone construction was placed under administrative review. Work on 2 foundational segments of the corridor was paused pending documentation verification. $67 million paused. Not canceled. Not yet. But the ground was moving in a way that Darnell had felt before on job sites, when a structure begins to shift before the collapse anyone can see. That specific vibration underneath everything that says something load-bearing has failed. He sat in his office and thought about a woman in a corner of a 2-bedroom house, working at 2 in the morning, building the exact systems that were now missing. He had not thought about her that way in weeks. He was thinking about her that way now. Marcus Hales stopped returning calls on a Thursday. By Friday, 2 others from the circle had become unreachable. By the following Monday, Priya's assistant informed Darnell that she was no longer available for the partnership discussion they had scheduled. The withdrawal was not dramatic. It never is with people like that. They do not announce their departure. They simply become busy, impossibly permanently busy, the moment the math stops working in their favor. Darnell sat in the Hargrove Grand Hotel boardroom, the same room where he had first felt like a man who had arrived, and waited for a meeting that 3 people did not attend. The chair at the head of the table, which had once felt like a position, now felt like a corner. The lawsuits came in pairs, one from a subcontractor whose payment schedule had been disrupted by the contract hold, one from a materials supplier whose delivery terms were tied to project milestones that were no longer being met. Both suits were legitimate. Both were direct consequences of the documentation gap that no one on his current team could close. His lawyer was calm in the way lawyers are when the situation has moved past the point where calm is reassuring. We need original copies of the subcontractor compliance forms from the pre-award phase, the lawyer said. We need the environmental baseline report and the internal project certification log. Do you have any of these? Darnell was quiet. Darnell, working on it, he said. He was not working on it. He had no idea where they were. He had never needed to know, because for 7 years there had been someone who always knew. Someone who built the systems before the systems were needed, who filed the documents before anyone asked for them, who kept the company alive in the spaces between the work that the world could see. He had called that someone his wife. He had told that someone she no longer fit his life. He sat in the empty boardroom after the lawyer left and looked at his hands, the same hands that had poured foundations, framed walls, and signed contracts worth millions. Strong hands, capable hands. Hands that had not once in 7 years filed a compliance document. He understood something in that room, not as an insight, as a weight, the kind that does not lift. The Clover Street Community Center sat at the edge of the Eastwood District, a neighborhood that had not benefited from the city's development plans, that existed in the part of Hargrove where the transit corridor would never reach. He found it by asking. Nobody in his current circle knew where it was. That told him something. He parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment. Through the large front window, he could see the interior, folding tables, children seated in uneven rows, a whiteboard covered in drawings and large printed letters. And at the front, moving alongside a table of young students, a woman in a wheelchair with her back to the door. Vanessa, She was showing a child how to fold a document correctly, creasing the edge, explaining something that made the child laugh. She had a red pen in her hand. Of course she did. Darnell walked in slowly. A few children looked up. One of the volunteers at the side of the room nodded at him. He moved toward the front, and at some point Vanessa sensed the shift in the room, the way she always sensed things, and turned. She saw him. Her expression did not collapse into relief or harden into anger. It did neither. It simply settled, the way a face settles when it has already made its peace with something and is no longer surprised by its presence. "Darnell," she said. "Hey, Vanessa." A pause that belonged entirely to the space between them. She gestured to the volunteer to take over and moved her chair slightly to the side of the room, near a window where the afternoon light came through at a low angle. He followed. He looked at the room, the children, the organized corner of supplies arranged with a neatness that was unmistakably hers. The volunteer board on the wall with schedules written in a handwriting he had read 10,000 times. She had rebuilt a version of what she always was. Without him, without the company, without the house. She had not waited to be recovered. She had simply continued. "You look well," he said, because it was true and because he did not know how to start. "I am," she said. He nodded, looked at his hands, looked back at her. "The contract is in trouble," he said, not as an accusation, not as an excuse, just as the truth he had come carrying. "I know," she said. He had not expected that. "How?" "Director Osai called me," she said simply. "She wanted to know if I still had access to the original compliance files." The room was quiet around them, children working, pencils moving, a world going on gently at the edges of a conversation that had been coming for weeks. "Do you?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He waited. She did not make him ask twice. That was not cruelty, it was simply who she was. "I'll send the files to your attorney," she said. "Not for you, for the subcontractors waiting on payment, for the workers on the project. They did nothing wrong." He absorbed that, felt the full precision of it. She had drawn the line cleanly, not between them, but between the people who deserved the work and the man who had discarded the person who made it possible. She was helping the project. She was not rescuing him. He stood by the window and looked at a woman he had once thought needed him. The error of that belief was so clear now that it felt almost architectural, a load-bearing miscalculation that a professional should have caught years earlier. "Vanessa," he said, his voice was lower now. "I don't," she said, not harshly, with the firmness of someone who has already written the chapter and is not interested in a new draft. He stopped. She looked at him directly, not with love, not with hatred, with something more difficult than both, clarity. "Success without loyalty," she said, "is just failure with better furniture." He said nothing. She held the stillness of it the way she held everything, quietly, completely, without apology. Then she turned her chair, moved back toward the table where the children were waiting, and picked up her red pen without looking back. Darnell stood at the window for a moment longer. He looked at the room, the careful organization of it, the children who leaned toward her when she spoke, the quiet authority she carried without ever raising her voice. Then he walked to the door. He did not try to explain. He did not ask for time or mercy or a conversation she had not offered. He simply left because some exits are the only honest thing a person has left to give. He drove home in silence, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of a man finally sitting with the full weight of what he had chosen and what it had cost. The project was partially salvaged. The files Vanessa sent resolved the compliance review. Some contracts held. 2 did not. The circle never returned. The Hargrove Grand Hotel boardroom was replaced slowly by smaller rooms and more careful decisions. Darnell rebuilt, not to the height he had reached on the night he told his wife she no longer fit, but to something more structurally sound. He never stopped thinking about what she said, not because it wounded him, though it did, but because it was true in the way that only a person who built something with you can tell the truth, without theater, without cruelty, with the calm authority of someone who no longer needed you to understand but offered it anyway. Success without loyalty is just failure with better furniture. He had owned both. Now he was learning the difference. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.